Most people think memory loss is something that happens in the brain alone. They assume it starts with forgetting names, misplacing keys, or struggling to focus. But what if I told you that in many cases, the real beginning of cognitive decline doesn't start in the brain at all? It starts in your muscles. That might sound unusual, even uncomfortable to hear, because we've been taught to separate the body into systems: brain, heart, muscles, digestion, each working independently. But in real clinical practice, especially in emergency medicine, that separation simply doesn't exist. When one system weakens, others follow. And muscle loss is one of the earliest and most powerful warning signs that the entire body, including the brain, is beginning to age faster than it should. My name is Dr. Miles. I've been working in emergency medicine for 13 years, and over that time, I've seen a pattern that most people completely miss. Two patients of the same age, same diagnosis, same medical history. One stays mentally sharp, alert, responsive. The other becomes confused, slower, and cognitively fragile under stress. The difference is rarely just the brain. It's muscle mass. And today, I want to explain exactly why that happens. Muscle loss is not just physical decline. When people hear muscle loss, they think about weakness, frailty, or aging posture. But biologically, muscle is far more than movement tissue. Your muscles act like a metabolic control system, a hormone regulator, and even a brain support network. So when muscle declines, it doesn't just affect strength. It affects inflammation, blood sugar regulation, hormone balance, and even brain chemistry. This is why researchers now refer to muscle as an endocrine organ, because it communicates with the rest of the body through chemical signals. And one of its most important targets? The brain, cognitive reserve, why some brains age faster than others. To understand this connection, we need to talk about something called cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is your brain's ability to resist damage and continue functioning despite stress, aging, or disease. Think of it like a backup system. Two people can have the same age, but completely different levels of cognitive reserve. One stays sharp under pressure. The other becomes mentally overwhelmed in situations that should be simple. And here's the key point most people miss. Muscle mass is one of the strongest contributors to building that reserve. Because muscle doesn't just protect the body, it protects the brain's resilience under stress. The muscle-brain chemical connection, when you use your muscles, especially during resistance activity like lifting, pushing, or carrying something heavy, your body releases signaling molecules called myokines. These molecules travel through the bloodstream and directly affect the brain. One of the most important effects is the stimulation of a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF acts like fertilizer for the brain. It supports growth of new brain connections, strengthening of memory pathways, repair of damaged neurons, protection against cognitive decline. When BDNF levels are high, the brain stays flexible and adaptable. When they drop, the brain becomes slower, less responsive, and more vulnerable to aging. And here's what matters most. Muscle loss leads to lower myokine production, which leads to lower BDNF, which leads to reduced brain plasticity. This is one of the most direct biological links between muscle and cognition. Inflammation, the silent bridge between muscle loss and dementia. There is another pathway that is even more important: chronic inflammation. Low-grade inflammation builds slowly over years, often without symptoms. But internally, it damages blood vessels, disrupts cellular communication, and accelerates aging across every organ system, including the brain. Here's where muscle becomes critical. Healthy muscle tissue actively helps regulate inflammation. It releases anti-inflammatory signals that keep the immune system balanced. But when muscle mass declines, this protective effect weakens. The result is higher baseline inflammation in the body. And that inflammation doesn't stay in the muscles. It reaches the brain. Over time, this contributes to memory decline, slower thinking, reduced attention, higher risk of neurodegenerative disease. In emergency medicine, I often see how inflammation affects acute confusion in older patients. Those with lower muscle mass are significantly more likely to become disoriented during illness, infection, or hospitalization. Not because their brain suddenly failed, but because their body had no reserve left to protect it. Muscle and blood sugar, the brain's energy supply system. Your brain consumes a huge amount of energy, far more than most people realize. It depends heavily on glucose stability. And muscle plays a central role in regulating that stability. Muscle tissue acts like a glucose reservoir. It absorbs sugar from the bloodstream and stores it efficiently. When muscle mass decreases, the body loses this buffering system. That leads to unstable blood sugar levels, which over time can damage both blood vessels and brain cells. Even more importantly, the brain relies on insulin signaling to function properly. When insulin resistance develops, brain cells struggle to use glucose efficiently. This is one of the reasons why metabolic disorders are strongly linked to cognitive decline. In fact, many researchers now refer to Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes due to this metabolic connection. Muscle loss increases insulin resistance, and insulin resistance accelerates brain aging. Why frailty is really a brain risk problem. In hospitals, we often assess something called frailty. Frailty isn't just weakness, it's a state of reduced physiological reserve. And one of the strongest predictors of frailty is low muscle mass. Frail patients are far more likely to experience delirium during illness. Delirium is an acute state of confusion where patients lose awareness, become disoriented, and struggle to process reality. But what's important is this: not every elderly patient develops delirium during illness. The ones who do are usually those with low muscle reserve. Because without muscle, the body cannot stabilize itself under stress. And when the body destabilizes, the brain follows. The long-term studies are consistent. Large population studies consistently show the same pattern. People with higher muscle strength in midlife have significantly lower rates of dementia later in life. Grip strength, a simple measure of overall muscle function, is now one of the strongest predictors of cognitive aging. Even when researchers control for diet, income, and genetics, the relationship remains. And perhaps most importantly, the speed of muscle loss predicts the speed of cognitive decline. This means it's not just how much muscle you have, but how quickly you lose it that matters. One of the most important discoveries in modern aging research is that muscle loss is not inevitable in the way people assume. Even later in life, muscle responds to training. And when muscle improves, the brain often improves alongside it. This is because the same biological systems are being activated: increased BDNF, reduced inflammation, improved glucose regulation, better circulation to the brain, enhanced neural connectivity. In practical terms, this means cognitive decline is not a fixed path. It is influenced by lifestyle, movement, and strength. What actually works to protect both muscle and brain? The most effective strategy is not complicated, but it must be consistent. The strongest evidence supports resistance training 2-3 times per week, compound movements like squats, pushes, and rows, progressive overload over time, daily movement, walking, stairs, general activity, adequate protein intake, sleep quality, and recovery. You don't need extreme training. You need consistent stimulation of muscle tissue so the brain continues receiving protective biological signals. One of the most dangerous beliefs is that cognitive decline is purely genetic or inevitable. It isn't. While genetics play a role, they are not the full story. Lifestyle factors, especially muscle mass and metabolic health, have a profound influence on brain aging. Another myth is that it's too late to start. But research shows that even people in their 60s and 70s and beyond can improve both strength and cognitive function through resistance training. The brain remains adaptable far longer than most people assume. If there is one takeaway from all of this, it is simple. Muscle is not just about movement. It is about protection. Protection against inflammation. Protection against metabolic dysfunction. Protection against cognitive decline. In emergency medicine, I've seen the difference it makes repeatedly. The patients who maintain muscle mass tend to maintain independence, clarity, and resilience under stress. The ones who lose it often lose far more than strength. They lose cognitive stability. So the question is not just how strong you are today. It's how much protection your body is building for your brain tomorrow. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing to the channel. It genuinely helps us reach more people who need this information, and it supports the growth of the channel so we can keep producing these videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.